We continue our study now of the Gospel of Mark, going to this passage that we have here from the 4th chapter, passage that is a parable of the lamp. And we want to think about that, meditate upon it, and understand how it can change the way we live in this world if we truly understand this parable of the lamp. In the beautiful song that Walter just sang, the key thought there is that it was the believer's prayer. And the idea is that that's who we are now and who we have become since we decided to follow Christ and made Christ the center part of our life. We became a believer. And that's the major way we should think of ourselves, as being a believer. But, we need to have a little more clarity about what does it mean to be a believer and what should we actually call a believer. In our world, generally speaking, we call someone who believes in Christ, we call them a Christian. Or we say that they are a saint. Or we might call them brother, or we might call them sister. Or we might say they're a Baptist, or they're a Methodist, or they're a Catholic, or they're Episcopalian. We got a lot of names for believers that indicate that they believe in a certain way and they believe about a certain thing. But I think that we actually really need a new name for Christians. And part of my ministry has always been to try to think of a new name for Christians. Because, the names that we use carry so much baggage with them. And people say, I don't associate with Christians and they believe Christians are this way and that way. Or I don't deal with Baptists, or I don't deal with Methodists. And so a lot of the labels that we have for Christians don't really help us very much in this world to be one united family under God. So much of my ministry, I've always tried to come up with a word or a different word that could be used to describe a Christian. And today I'd like to introduce you to a word that I use often and which I wish we did use more often to describe Christians. And that word is lampion. We are lampions. We are the lamps of God. That's who we are. And so I think maybe we need to have a t-shirt that says, I'm not trying to be a champion because I'm a lampion. I don't know if that'd go over or not. But nonetheless, the point is, it describes a lot about who we are really supposed to be. And this gospel reading we have today from the Gospel of Mark really clarifies who we are and what we are supposed to be. It's a little simple parable, but you have to kind of break it down and think about it to get the full impact of what is being talked about here. Jesus said, if you bring a lamp into this room, you got to ask right off the bat, who is bringing a lamp into the room? Who's doing that? Well, the way the parable is written, it is you who's bringing the lamp into the room. The basic context, the basic meaning is, if you bring a lamp into the room, and it's you bringing that lamp into the room. And Jesus often described his disciples in various ways, but he said to them, you are the light of the world. You are the lamp of God. You have been given the gift of knowing God and understanding who God is, and God dwells in you and in your understandings of life. So you got the light in you, the light of the world. You got the lamp in you, the lamp of God. Now, if you bring that lamp into a room, and what is the room? Of course, the room is the world itself, the whole world out here. And if God brings you into this world and you have been given a lamp inside and you have this light of God within, what are you to do with this light of God that you have within? How are you to use it, and what are you to do about it? The common human response is to try to hide it. To try to keep it all to ourselves. It's for me. It's me and Jesus, and that's all I need to know. You know, I oftentimes have found myself in a situation where I'm feeding pigeons, sitting on a park bench, throwing pieces of bread out to a pigeon. And you know, when the dominant pigeon gets that piece of bread, you know what he does with it? He doesn't start sharing it with his neighbors. He runs off under the tree someplace and tries to eat it all by himself. And I said, well, that's exactly how humans are. We're just like the pigeons. When we got God, we're so happy we got God. And when we have the understanding of God, we're so happy we have that understanding. We're so glad, as we sang a while back, to be a part of the family of God. And that's all good. That's a wonderful thing that you're glad about it. But like Jesus says, you don't put it under a bed and you don't put it under a bowl. You don't try to hide it and you don't try to keep it all for yourself, because a lamp is meant to be shared. Light is meant to be shared. It's not just for you. It's for everyone in the room. And so if you have the light, then you have the responsibility to share it. It is your response to having the light that you have a desire to share it with everyone in your world. That is what you do with it. You share it with those who are part of your world. But what does it mean, you share it with everyone in your world? What does that mean? Do you just sit there and glow? Say, oh, look at me, I'm glowing. Isn't that nice? No, Jesus goes on to spell out clearly. He says, you use that light to expose everything that is hidden, and you use it to expose everything that is concealed. That's what he says. That's what you do. That's what the world needs, is someone who uses the light that they have to expose the truth about God and the truth about His love that the world has hidden from us, that the world has concealed from us. You have to ask when you read this scripture, who's doing the hiding here? Who's doing the concealing here? Who has hidden things from us? Who has concealed things from us? Well, it is the human world that has done that. All the things that are true about God, the world in which we live wants to hide them where we cannot find them. Wants to keep them hidden behind a curtain of all kinds of desirable activities, desirable pleasures, things that you could do, things that you could play with, all kinds of things. The world creates this way of hiding the truth about God so that we can't really see it, for the fact that the world is trying to get our view to be focused on it and what it wants us to pay attention to. Pay attention to yourself. Pay attention to what you dream about. Pay attention to what you want to do. Pay attention to how you can be successful in this life and in this world. Pay attention to these things. Please do not look over here where it talks about the truth about God, because we do not want you to know that, because if you know that, then the world loses its power over you. So it's the world that's hiding these things, and it's the world that's concealing these things from us as well. And what's the difference between hiding something and concealing something? Something is hidden, which means you have to look for it. Something is being concealed by someone who does not want you to know about it. And that's the way the world is. If you want to know the truth about God and you want to know the truth about His love, you got to look for it. And you got to look for it hard, because the world doesn't show it to you very often, and the world doesn't let you see where it is. And if you want to find out the truth about how God feels about you, and you want to find out the truth about why you're here, what you're supposed to be doing, and how you're supposed to be doing, you want to find out the truth about that, well, then you got to check out the world and see what it's concealing from you. And so I think that's the really important point that we want to grasp here today, is that we're given this light Not just for ourselves to hold on to and say, oh, I got the light in me, or just to sit there and glow. But we have this light within us to use to expose for our own benefit, yes, and for the benefit of our neighbors and friends, the truths about God and the truths about God's love. And we want to be able to live in such a way that we expose those truths. The world may try to hide them, but I stand here to show you what they are. So, in the time I have here today, then, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the truths that the world hides from us and the truths that the world conceals from us. I want to talk a little bit about them and how we need to focus on making sure that we know these truths and that we live by these truths and that we live in such a way that the world can see what it's like to live by these truths. Before I do that, I want to make sure you understand at the very end of this passage of Mark, Jesus says what he oftentimes says when he teaches you by parable. He says, let those who have ears to hear, hear. And you know, a lot of people go, I got ears, I can hear. He's not talking about the ears you got on your head. Everybody's got ears on their head. He's talking about listening to what you can actually really hear. And then you have to say to yourself, well, what does that mean? What does it really mean to be able to have ears to hear? What is it that I can hear that I don't necessarily hear with my ears? Well, we have an expression in English that sums it up very clearly. Actions speak louder than words. Actions speak louder than words. So if you want the world to hear the truths you have discovered, if you want the world to understand the truths about God's love that you have understood, don't be talking about it. Everybody can hear somebody talking. But when you are acting and doing those things, then the world hears it loud and clear. So I want to talk about the fact that we can use the light within us to expose that truth to others and to ourselves. Give you a few examples of what I've seen in my life about that. And so the first one I would like to talk about, there's three of them I'd like to talk about today. The first one is this truth. The highest and best use of your life is to live in such a way that others will not have to suffer. Okay? That's the truth of God. That's why we have a cross as our meme, so to speak. It is our symbol that says if you want to know the highest and best use of your life, it is to die for those who are suffering, just like Jesus did. It is to give up your life to those who are living in darkness so that they will no longer have to live in darkness. That's the truth of God. That's the truth of the gospel. But you know what the world tells us? No. Don't believe that. Here, look over this way. The real truth is the best life is the life lived for yourself. That's the best life. And the life in which you become a successful person. You do everything right. You have everything you could ever have as a human being. That's the best life. That's the highest and best use of your life because that's what human beings do. And that's absolutely true 100%. That is what human beings do. And that is what human beings think is the highest and best use of their life. But it's a lie, and that's why Jesus says, you know, your father is the father of the lies when he talked to the Jews. Because the world wants to tell us over and over again that that's the truth. But if we have the light of God, if we have the lamp inside of us that can shine on life and look at the truth about life, we can understand that the highest and best use of our life that really speaks to the world in which we live is a life that is lived so that others do not have to suffer in their darkness. Whoever has lived that kind of life and shown that kind of life to others has shown people the truth that God has said over and over again and who He has presented to us in the person of Jesus. I want to give you one example, just in case you don't know about her. This woman's name is Elizabeth Elliot, with one T. And if you don't know Elizabeth Elliot's story, you should know that, living here in Ecuador as you do. Back in 1952, a long time ago, Elizabeth and her husband and 2 other young missionaries came here to Ecuador because they had a heart to go out into the Amazon and to start working with the Amazon tribes to help them to learn how to have a better life, learning about hygiene, learning about how to read, learning about all the kinds of things that they did not know about, because these were very primitive people in 1952. And they decided to take their ministry to a tribe known as the Waores. And the Waores live in the Amazon, the northeastern part of the Amazon. And the 3 men missionaries decided to go first, and the women would come after they went and establish contact with the Waores. And of course, this was 1952, and they did not really understand a lot about how you get along with a primitive people that doesn't even know who you are or what you're about. And so they walked into that jungle with rifles on their shoulders, looking very white and very much alive with Western culture. And of course, as the story goes, the Waores did not know who they were, why they were invading their land, and so they shot them full of arrows, and all 3 missionary men died right there. It was a worldwide scandal that they killed these missionaries. Very sad story. Well, Elizabeth, of course, lost her husband that way, and she was a missionary, very much so. And her friend, who was one of the wives of one of the other missionaries, she was very dedicated to it as well. But they went back to the States, but they just couldn't stop thinking about the poor people that lived in the Amazon in darkness and suffered from their ignorance and their darkness. And Elizabeth told her friend, she said, "How can I let these people live in darkness? How can I do that?" And so she took her 3-year-old son and she came back to Ecuador, and she walked into the jungle by herself to communicate with these Waores that had killed her husband 2 years ago, that God had nothing but love for them, and she had nothing but love for them. And she shone that light into their lives and enabled them to begin to understand, because as primitive Indians, all they understood that was God was a God. If there was a God, they believed in a God that would punish them if they didn't make offerings to Him. And if they didn't do as they should do, God would punish them. And they believed in a punishing God. And she started trying to teach them about a God who loved them for the potential of who they could become. And she began to teach their children how to speak English, and she began to teach them how to read. And she became a force in the Amazon that literally converted the members of the Waore tribe into people that began to understand not only the Christian faith, but be able to live in the 20th century at that time. And her story spread all over the world, and she became one of the most famous missionary people of all time. But it's what she said that I remember as being an example of being a lampion. It was her motivation that says, how can I let these people live in darkness? How can I do that? I'm full of the light. I have seen the truth. I understand what it's all about. How can I let them live in darkness? And that motivated her. And that caused her to go back with the greatest courage of faith you could ever have, and live by herself with her children in that jungle with those Amazon people for, I think it was 1967 before she went back to the States. So that's an example there of a person who understood the truth because she had seen the truth. She had understood the truth, and she knew that the highest and best use of her life was to not let others live in darkness. That is it. It's the same motivation you should have if all of a sudden you're in a building and it's catching on fire. What do? Do you just run out by yourself and take your possessions and say, "Good luck, folks, I hope you make it"? No. If you have a heart at all, you start doing whatever you can to warn them about the building's on fire and we need to all get out of here. You see, that is what it means to let your lamp shine. Because this world's got a lot of darkness in it, a lot of darkness everywhere. And people are suffering from that darkness. The darkness of poverty, the darkness of disease, the darkness of greed, the darkness of hate, the darkness of differences between the races and the cultures and so forth. All of that darkness is causing people to suffer. And we need to somehow or another stand up and be the lamp of God and say there's no reason for this darkness to ever affect us in any way. Being that Thanksgiving is next Thursday, I was so disappointed to hear that in the United States, some of the psychologists and psychiatrists are telling persons not to go to their Thanksgiving dinner if their relatives voted for somebody they didn't believe they should have voted for. What kind of a world do we live in? The darkness is everywhere. And we must be those who stand up with the light and say, no, 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 no. We don't need this darkness. There's no reason for it. It's really silly. And to do whatever we can to make that darkness go away. So that's one example I would share with you today. There's another example I would share with you. And that is this. The world tries to hide from us the truth that this universe, this cosmos, this everything that there ever is and ever was is God's show, not our show. We human beings think it's all about us. And all 8 or 9 billion of us on the face of this earth, every one of them thinks that life is about them. What a mess. Life isn't about any of us. It's not about any of us. It's about one thing only, and that's God and what's God's will for our lives. And that will is that we become the divine, loving persons that we have always been from eternity and have the potential to be now in this time, and to spread the news of that fact to anyone we can find, that this is the true purpose of our life, is to be that divine one that follows and imitates Jesus, who was the ultimate divine one. It's not our show. It's God's show. But the world tries to hide that. You know, they say now that we have the ability with our TVs and with our internets to watch in any one time that we want to turn on those devices. Over 4,000 different channels we can watch at any given moment of the day. 4,000 shows going on everywhere that we can watch. But the truth of the matter is there's only one show we need to be paying attention to, and that is the show that God's putting on. And the show He's putting on is to show us the truth that we are His children and we are meant to be like Him, you see. The example I would share with you right quickly would be a man that I think probably all of you have heard of and know about. His name was George Beverly Shea, and he was a great singer. And you know who he sang with, Billy Graham. And you know they did rallies all over the world in which Billy would preach and George Beverly Shea would sing. But you know the story behind George Beverly Shea and how he became the one who sang with Billy Graham. He was a great singer before he became a Christian. He had a tremendous voice. And he was studying the Bible at that time and beginning to understand what Christianity was about. And he had heard Billy Graham preach a few times, but he was still very much interested in his own show at that time. And literally so, NBC, which was a television station at that time, just offered him a contract that says, listen, Beverly Shea, we want you to come and sing on a new show we're putting together called The Tonight Show. And we want you to be the one that leads the band and does the singing. What a great opportunity he had. Because you know what became of The Tonight Show, and you know what became of NBC. He could have been a rich man forever and ever. But his mother had given him a poem to think upon, and he read that poem when he was trying to make a decision. Do I go and work for NBC, or do I follow this Billy Graham all over the world singing? Which do I do? And the poem his mother had given him was one entitled, I'd rather have Jesus than silver or gold. And he sat down at the piano and he wrote a hymn that we now sing all the time. And he decided at that point that the highest and best use of his life was to go and to sing for that gospel that was being preached around the world. And that gospel was saying, it's God's show. Come and enjoy it. Come and watch it. Come and be part of it. It's not your show anymore. It's the show of Christ. And you need to be a part of that. And he joined with Billy, and of course, as we all know, had great influence throughout the world because he had seen the truth that it is God's show, not his show. And he had dedicated his life to that. And there it is again. Use your light to let people know that you live as if life is God's show and that your part in it is to do whatever God has asked you to do. Is it singing or acting or whatever else it is? You got a role to play, but it's God's show. You see, and you must understand that that's what you do when you do what you do. It's you're doing what God wants you to do because it's His show, not your show. That's the light, you know. But it's all about how you live and why you do what you do. You do what you do either because you yourself thinks it's what you do, or it's because it's God's show and He wants you to do it. So think upon that as you go. And then finally, the last example I would like to give to you, and I handed out her picture to you, is a saint that lived right here among us. Her name was Sally Marr. And you see her picture there. And Sally was really a great believer. She was a believer in doing whatever she could do to relieve the darkness of others in this world. And she may not have said it this way, but I'll say it this way. She believed that love, God's love, overcomes all darkness. You know, the world in which we live does not believe that. It does not believe that God's love overcomes all things. It doesn't believe that. It believes it's up to human ability, human understanding. It is up to us to solve our problems. It is up to us to overcome the darkness. It's up to us to do whatever we can to make things right that are wrong. And we have gotten into an age of what can be called nothing but humanism, which is to say that all of our problems can be solved if human beings would just do a better job. Problem is, human beings can't do a better job. We try hard, and we try to do whatever we can. But in the end, it is only love, and it is only divine love, as we see it in our hearts, that shows others that despite the darkness, there's a light. Despite the darkness, there's a hope. Despite the darkness, there's a peace and there's a joy, and it is as real can be. But the world doesn't want us to understand that. The world says, no, it's all about the physical, all about the human, all about the secular, all about this world. I hate to tell you that, but that is a lie. It is not all about that. It's about God and what God can do once we open our lives to the spiritual side of reality and become those who know that love overcomes everything. Those pictures I showed to you of Sally Marr are pictures I selected from many that I received this week from her husband Peter. But I think in those pictures you see it so clearly. She's holding up that lettuce because she believes that you're in darkness. You don't have anything hardly to eat, and somebody offers to give you a sandwich, and yet somebody thought to stop and put some lettuce on it if there was not any lettuce on it. Now, that overcomes the darkness. Yeah, it helps you to believe that there's a little reason to get up and do something that day because somebody else believed that you didn't need to just suffer in darkness. And then the other one you see, which is the most moving to me, but you got to know the story about it. The little girl in that picture just lost her mother, passed away. And they were sitting there on the curb with her father with a sign asking for help. And Sally went there and knelt down with that child and held her hand. And you see it in the picture. That's a person who understands that it's love that overcomes the darkness. And she showed her love to everyone she met and dealt with and had a part to live with them in her life. And to us, that should be a great example. This is what we can do. We can show this world that love overcomes everything. It doesn't do away with the darkness, but it overcomes its effect. Doesn't do away with all the poverty and the horribleness and the grinding life that so many people have to live. Doesn't do away with that. But it gives them something a little higher, a little better, a little more excellent that enables them to overcome that darkness and live with some hope and some peace and some joy. And it's great. I spent many times talking to Sally when we worked together on this ministry. And one time I remember I was over visiting with them, delivering some stuff. And she was talking about this and that. And she mentioned the fact that she always loved a quote from the Bible. And she got it wrong, but she got it right. She said, you know that part in the Bible where it says, love your neighbor as you used to love yourself. I had to think about that. Probably that's the better way to say it, actually. But she had it right. She knew she'd lived a selfish life. She knew what that was all about, and she knew how great it could be for a human being. But she found out that there was a greater life, and that was in overcoming and relieving the pain of those who were hungry and suffered because of that. She understood what it meant to love others more than you used to love yourself one day. So, then the whole point of this little parable today should be very clear to every one of us. And that is, you have the light of God in your heart. But the reason you have it is not just so you can say, oh, me and Jesus, we're great together. No. It's so that you can use that light to show others the truths that this world has hidden from them. I could talk about truths all morning long. There's so many more truths that have been hidden from us by the world in which we live. But these that I've talked about here today are some of the really big ones that we need to keep in mind. But the point of the matter is, you have this light so that you can live in such a way as someone who has seen the truths of God and understands them and lives in the situation where you now understand how clear it is that this is God's show and not your show. That God wants us to live a life that relieves the sufferings of others, and that we are enabled to love others like we used to love ourselves. These are great truths, and we know these great truths to be true. And if we live them, just simply live them, then others will see us living them. And believe me, they will hear loud and clear, here's someone who believes these things and understands these things. Maybe the world is lying to me. Maybe I need to get out of this darkness and get into the light. And that is the point of the whole thing. So every day, I hope now from this point forward, you'll remember this little story of the lamp. And you'll go out on your day understanding you're carrying a lamp. You may not think you're carrying a lamp. You don't even realize you have a lamp. But you got a lamp. And what should you be doing? You should be looking for some darkness. And it doesn't take long to find it, let me tell you. Be looking for that darkness and then ask the question, how can I go in there and light it up? That's to be stirred up for Christ, and that's what I'm talking about today. Amen. And now let us receive our benediction. Go forth into this world of darkness and know that you have a lamp of God within you. Let that light shine into every darkness you encounter so that Christ might be glorified. Amen.